Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I am flying solo today, so I'll be giving you both the Washington Report and the call to action. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate will be in session Tuesday through Friday of this week. This week in the House, they'll come back tomorrow with the first vote scheduled for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 15 bills under suspension of the rules. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the House will consider 3 bills scheduled pursuant to a rule. First, H.R. 8446, the Critical Mineral Consistency Act of 2024. Second, H.R. 7409, the HEATS Act. And third, H.R. 8932, the FAFSA Deadline Act. This week in the Senate will also come back Tuesday with the first vote scheduled for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the confirmation of April M. Perry to be a U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see votes on the nominations of John E. Hawley to be a U.S. District Judge for the Central District of Illinois, David Huitema to be the director of the Office of Government Ethics for a term of 5 years, and Kathy Fung to be a judge of the United States Tax Court for a term of 5 years. Another judge tells Biden he can't. When it rains, it pours. Not only did Joe Biden's team have to suffer the ignominy of watching his hand-chosen vice president receive a drubbing in last week's election, he also had to suffer yet another judge telling him he couldn't do something on his own without congressional action. That's been a recurring pattern in this administration. Biden has been overturned by the courts on his student loan bailout scam, his eviction moratorium, his EPA overreach, his COVID vaccine mandates, and other policy initiatives where he seems to think he has a magic wand that he and he alone can wave. His latest attempt to run afoul of that pesky Constitution of ours is his attempt to rewrite immigration law to create a path to citizenship for hundreds of thousands of undocumented spouses of American citizens. Biden announced that policy in August. 16 Republican-led states, led by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, sued. And last week, a federal judge in Texas issued a 74-page ruling explaining that Biden did not have the authority to create the program on his own. Now, bye-bye Jack Smith. Elections have consequences, as Barack Obama famously said. And one of them is that Special Counsel Jack Smith's ongoing prosecutions against President-elect Trump are soon going to come to an end, because of the long-standing Department of Justice policy that says you cannot prosecute a sitting president. That policy goes back to the Nixon administration, when the department's Office of Legal Counsel published a memo that concluded that the prosecution of a sitting president would, quote, unduly interfere in a direct or formal sense with the conduct of the presidency, end quote. Quote, in light of the effect that an indictment would have on the operations of the executive branch, quote, an impeachment proceeding is the only appropriate way to deal with the president while in office, end quote, the memo concluded. There are still questions that remain. Will the special counsel write a report, as special counsels usually do? Could the prosecutions be put on hold until Trump leaves office in 4 years? What happens to the evidence? What will happen to the 2 other defendants in the classified documents case in Florida? Now to bye-bye New York prosecution. Judge Juan Merchan, who's the presiding judge in Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's prosecution of President Trump, that's the one where the jury came back with 34 felony convictions on bogus bookkeeping, will announce his decision tomorrow on whether or not the case can stand, given Trump's lawyers' appeal based on the Supreme Court decision regarding presidential immunity. Trump's lawyers want the judge to throw out all 34 convictions based on the Supreme Court's ruling that even former presidents enjoy at least some immunity. They say Bragg's use of White House staff as witnesses poisons the prosecution, and the case should be thrown out as a result. Bragg argues otherwise, saying the president's actions were personal and therefore not protected by the Supreme Court ruling. Merchan could stop the case tomorrow, or he could decide to continue it and assume that Trump's lawyers will appeal again. And he's rescheduled the sentencing date for November 26. He's already delayed that sentencing once and may choose to do so again. Now to the latest on illegal immigration. Elections have consequences, lesson 2. A migrant caravan of some 3,000 individuals left Tapachula, Mexico, near its southern border with Guatemala, last Tuesday morning, hoping to make it to the United States. By Thursday, members of the caravan had heard of our election results, and about half of them had dropped out. An official of Mexico's National Migration Institute, who was tracking the caravan, said it was down to about 1,600 people by Thursday. Now let's talk about congressional leadership elections. With a new Congress comes new leadership elections. And for the first time since 2006, Senate Republicans will have a new leader, as Kentucky's Mitch McConnell has announced his retirement from the position at the end of the current Congress. McConnell has 2 more years to serve in his current term representing Kentucky, and he will serve that out, but he will do it from the back bench. Senate Republicans will choose from among 3 declared candidates for Majority Leader: South Dakota's John Thune, Texas's John Cornyn, and Florida's Rick Scott. Thune is the current party whip, the number 2 position in leadership. Cornyn is a former party whip and former chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, who's raised some $400 million for his fellow Republican senators since coming to the Senate. Scott is a former governor of Florida who challenged McConnell for the leader position at the start of the current Congress. He may or may not be aided by the fact that President-elect Trump's choice for White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, served as Senator Scott's campaign manager in his 2010 run for governor. Some Republican senators may think a good relationship with the president's chief of staff would be a helpful quality to have in a leader. The election is set to take place Wednesday. It will not be like the election for Speaker, which takes place in public, with all the members of the House being called on by the Clerk of the House to declare their choice on the floor in public. Instead, this election will take place in a private room, maybe even the old Senate chamber, and will be conducted by secret ballot, with each of the Republican senators who will serve in the 119th Congress being given a paper ballot to write on. Even though J.D. Vance will serve as vice president beginning on January 20, he will be serving as a member of the 119th Congress until that point, so he will be allowed to vote in the election. Once the election for Majority Leader is settled, Senate Republicans will move to their next contested position. It's the number 3 position, Conference Chair, because Wyoming Senator John Barrasso decided not to make it a 4-way race for leader and opted instead to satisfy himself with moving up from his current position as conference chairman, the number 3 job, to the number 2 job, party whip. And nobody has stepped up to challenge him for the number 2 job, so it's going to be his by acclamation. The 2 candidates for the number 3 job, conference chair, are Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, who currently serves as the policy chair, the number 4 job in leadership, and Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. Cotton is secure enough in his whip count that he allowed it to be leaked yesterday to Axios, which duly reported that Cotton believes he has locked down enough votes to win the contest. That would box out Ernst, because the vice chairman of the Senate Republican Conference, West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito, has declared her own candidacy for the job Ernst holds now, Policy Committee Chair. On the House side, the top of the House Republican leadership, Speaker Mike Johnson, Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Majority Whip Tom Emmer, Conference Chair Elise Stefanik, have declared their desire to continue to serve in those positions in the 119th Congress. No one has emerged yet to challenge any of them. But conservatives are thinking about voting against Johnson in the secret ballot election that will be held on Wednesday among House Republicans. They may challenge him with a candidate, Or they may simply write in somebody else's name, or they may vote present on the secret ballot just to register opposition to him and let him know that his re-election as Speaker in January is not a foregone conclusion, that he still has work to do to woo the votes of conservatives. If no candidate emerges, the leadership could simply call for a voice vote on Johnson's nomination to serve as Speaker. That would undercut the conservatives' attempt to make their point. There appears to be a group of about 15 conservatives who are seeking accommodations with Johnson. They're concerned about spending bills and will be looking to see how he handles negotiations over the year-end spending bill that'll have to be decided by December 20, when the current continuing resolution expires. Stay tuned. Now to campaign 2024, the results. First, the Electoral College. Grover Cleveland, elected president in 1884, defeated for re-election in 1888, and then re-elected president in 1892, is rolling over in his grave, upset at no longer being able to claim his status as the only American president to serve non-consecutive terms. Where to begin explaining the breadth and depth of Donald Trump's win last Tuesday? Goodness gracious. Start with the Electoral College. It takes 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. Trump triumphed with 312. He won every single one of the 7 battleground states the two campaigns focused on: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And it wasn't even close. After 2 elections that were decided by 77,000 votes and 44,000 votes spread across 3 states, Trump triumphed in a red wave, where the closest margin in any of the battleground states was 30,000 votes. That was in Wisconsin, which just seems to like to cut it close in presidential contests. Biden carried it by about 20,682 votes in 2020, and Trump carried it by 22,748 votes in 2016. Back to this election. Beyond Wisconsin, Trump won Nevada by 46,000 votes, Michigan by 80,000, Georgia by 117,000, Pennsylvania by 145,000, Arizona by 185,000, and North Carolina by 190,000. And not all of the vote is yet counted in all those states, so those numbers may change a bit before they're finalized. As of last night, the vote count stood at 74,832,689 votes for Trump and 71,238,770 votes for Harris. That's a 50.4 to 48.0% win, and it represents the first time a Republican candidate for president has won an outright majority of the popular vote since 2004. This was a big election. Turnout as a percent of eligible voters was 63.8%. That's the second highest turnout percentage since 1960, second only to 2020, when turnout hit 66.7%. There were many reasons that voters went to the polls, but I think a major theme is this. Voters have had a sense for several years that things were spiraling out of control, and Trump exploited that by positioning himself as what he is, a strong leader. 30% of the electorate said, when asked what candidate quality matters most, ability to lead. He won among that cohort by 65 to 34%. 27% responded, can bring needed change. He won that cohort by 73 to 25%. And here's the one that's going to make Harris supporters and DNC staffers cringe. 19% responded, cares about people like me. And Trump won that cohort by 74 to 24%. Trump won by improving his standing among virtually all voter groups. Among women, he was up 5% compared to his showing in 2020. Among women 18 to 29 years old, he was up 14%. Among non-white voters, he was up 13%. Among Hispanics, he was up 15%. Among black men, he was up 25 points. Among those who make between $50,000 and $100,000 per year, he was up 6 points. Among moderates, he was up 9. Among young people, those aged 18 to 29, he was up 20 points. One of the gobsmacking moments of the evening was watching on CNN when John King and Jake Tapper were at the map. And Tapper asked to see a breakdown by county of the places where Vice President Harris had done well enough in 2024 to outperform Joe Biden's totals from 2020. When King manipulated the controls to bring up the desired map, the screen showed nothing. Tapper was aghast. "Holy smokes, literally nothing?" he asked. King responded, "Nothing." Tapper said, "Literally? Not one county?" Now let's talk about Senate election results. Republicans recaptured control of the Senate, moving from a 49-seat minority position to a 53-seat majority position. Republican candidates replaced Democrat incumbents in West Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Montana. They came close but did not prevail in Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. With 53 seats in the 119th Congress, the Republicans will enjoy a 4-seat net gain. To find the last time a Republican candidate for president had coattails long enough to bring in 4 new Republican senators, you have to go back to the election of 1980, when Ronald Reagan's coattails were so long he carried in with him 11 new Republican senators and flipped the Senate from 58-42 Democrat to 53-47 Republican control. Now let's talk about House election results. As of this writing, according to the Associated Press, Republicans have won 214 seats in the House and Democrats have won 203. It takes 218 seats to control the majority. It looks like Republicans will control the majority in the 119th Congress, but it will still be a very narrow margin of control. So far, Democrats have picked up 5 seats previously held by Republicans in Alabama's 2nd, Louisiana's 6th, New York's 4th, 19th, and 22nd districts. Each of those flips was predicted or predictable, because each was the result of a court-ordered mid-decade redistricting. Meanwhile, Republicans have flipped 7 seats previously held by Democrats: Colorado's 8th district, Michigan's 7th, North Carolina's 6th district, North Carolina's 14th district, Pennsylvania's 7th district, and Pennsylvania's 8th district. The 3-seat pickup in North Carolina was also the result of a mid-decade redistricting. Now let's talk about non-citizen voting ballot measures. Non-citizen voting was on the statewide ballot in 8 states: Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. In each state, the ballot measure making it explicitly illegal for non-citizens to vote in state and local elections passed. 6 states, Iowa, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Wisconsin, will amend existing language in the state constitution to declare that only citizens can vote, tightening language that currently says every citizen or all citizens can vote. Idaho and Kentucky will insert language into their state constitutions declaring that no person who is not a citizen of the United States may vote. This now brings to 20 the number of states that have such language in their state constitutions. Meanwhile, voters in Santa Ana, California also voted on a measure that would allow non-citizens to vote in the city's municipal elections. As of Saturday night, that ballot measure was going down to defeat by a margin of 61 to 39%. Now let's talk about other ballot measures of interest. Ranked choice voting. A number of states put ranked choice voting on their statewide ballots, and the left was resoundingly defeated all across the board. In blue states like Colorado, and red states like Idaho and Montana, and purple states like Arizona and Nevada. Missouri, which not that long ago was a bellwether battleground state that voted for the winner of the presidential contest in every election but one for the 100 years between 1904 and 2004, went so far as to proactively pass a ballot measure that would ban the practice in the state just in case anybody was thinking of launching a campaign there in Missouri. Abortion. 10 states put abortion on their statewide ballot. In Arizona and Missouri, voters approved measures that will effectively protect abortion rights until fetal viability and overturn existing abortion laws on the books. Voters in Colorado, Maryland, Montana, Nevada, and New York all passed some form of ballot measure enshrining abortion rights in their state constitutions. Meanwhile, voters in Florida, Nebraska, and South Dakota rejected ballot measures to add abortion rights to their state constitutions, thereby becoming the first statewide ballot measures supporting abortion rights to be defeated since the Supreme Court released its Dobbs ruling overturning Roe v. Wade 2 summers ago. Now, who's to blame? Campaigns matter. The Harris campaign had $1 billion to spend, and they apparently spent $1.02 billion because they've somehow ended the campaign $20 million in debt. She's going to have a hard time paying off that debt because she has to raise it in chunks no larger than $3,300. And she can't take money from any donor who's already maxed out. And she doesn't even have a seat in the Senate or in a governor's mansion to go back to. After Trump and Vance are inaugurated in January, she'll be without a political office for the first time in 20 years. And who wants to give money to a losing candidate who doesn't even hold an office and therefore can't do anything for them and who doesn't have very good prospects for the future? Ask Al Gore, what are the prospects for future political office for a losing vice president? But I digress. Campaigns do matter. We know this because according to an analysis done by the Cook Political Report, in the 7 battleground states where Kamala Harris's campaign spent the vast majority of that $1 billion, the swing to Trump between 2020 and 2024 was limited to 3 points. But across the remaining 43 states, the swing was nearly 7 points. That's small consolation to the Democrat donors who ponied up about $2 billion. Yes, I know, I just said $1.02 billion was about what the Harris campaign spent, but remember, there were a ton of other Democrats running for office, and those campaigns all cost money too, all told about $2 billion. Some Democrats are trying to pass off the loss as inevitable. They say inflation and illegal immigration put voters in such a bad mood that no Democrat could have won. With a president with very, very low approval ratings and a wrong-track number that hovered at 70%, they argue, there was no way any Democrat candidate could have won. Don't believe it. If Harris couldn't have won, she shouldn't have run in the first place. And why was she here anyway? Other Democrats point the finger at Joe Biden and argue that he set up his party for failure by not announcing a year and a half ago that he had succeeded in his mission to defeat Trump in 2020 and return the nation to a sense of normalcy. And he was going to keep his campaign promise to serve as a bridge to a new generation of leaders, and then leave a primary process open to all comers to let the next generation of Democrat leaders fight it out for the nomination. Harris, as the sitting vice president, would have had advantages for sure, but as the sitting vice president in a very unpopular administration, she also would have had baggage. So there's no telling who would have won an open primary. Of course, that's what Nancy Pelosi is saying now. Pelosi is widely credited for putting the knife between Biden's ribs when, after Biden's disastrous performance in his June debate with Trump, neither Barack Obama nor Chuck Schumer appeared to be man enough to take on the task of telling the incumbent president that he had lost the confidence of the party's elites and had to step down. Man enough? No problem for Pelosi, a leader who gutted her way to the top of the fractious House Democrat caucus and stayed there for 20 years. But in an interview after the election with the New York Times, Pelosi indicated that she would have preferred for there to have been some kind of open primary process to choose a replacement nominee after Biden dropped out. She said she believed Harris would have done well in a primary, quote, "but we don't know that," unquote. She added, quote, "that didn't happen. We live with what happened," end quote. Biden certainly will live with what happened. He'll take plenty of blame for what happened from other Democrats. So will his White House advisors, who hid from the public just how bad his mental decline truly was. Kamala Harris was one of those who hid the extent of Biden's decline. She bears responsibility for her loss on that front and for being a terrible candidate. There's a reason she got knocked out of the 2020 Democrat presidential primary process before they even got to Iowa. She's just a flawed candidate. She can't think on her feet and she can't go off script. She has a tough time making decisions under pressure, which is one of the key features of being a candidate for president, because it's one of the key features of being president. Right now, and for the foreseeable future, the Democrats are going to be engaged in a circular firing squad. That's what happens when you lose so badly, especially to a candidate you simply cannot believe anyone voted for. I'm reminded of the tale of liberal columnist Mary McGrory, who used to write a must-read column for liberals in the Washington Post. On the night of the 1994 midterm election, when Newt Gingrich and his Republican colleagues had stunned Washington to capture control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years, she was seen sitting by herself outside a hotel's election night festivities, softly crying to herself. "I don't even know any Republicans," she was heard to say. And that, for the liberal elites who write the New York Times and the Washington Post and who broadcast what they call news on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and MSNBC, is just the tip of the problem. Now to Trump personnel moves. We're not going to get into speculation about who's up and who's down, who's in and who's out during the course of Trump's second transition. I'm just going to report to you what we know about personnel appointments that have been made and announced. Trump announced his choice for White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, his successful campaign co-manager. She has the single most important quality for success in a White House Chief of Staff, the principal's trust. He knows he can count on her to have his back. In addition, Trump posted a truth on Truth Social over the weekend, announcing that former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo and former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley would not be serving in his second administration. Sunday night, Trump announced that former Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Director Tom Homan would be joining the new Trump administration, quote, "in charge of our nation's borders, the borders are, including but not limited to the southern border, the northern border, all maritime and aviation security," end quote. Also Sunday night, Trump gave a scoop to the New York Post on his decision to nominate New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik to serve as his ambassador to the United Nations, a position she was known to want. Republicans should have no problem winning that seat in a special election. She won last Tuesday with more than 62% of the vote. But that means Republicans will be down one vote in the House until the special election is held next spring. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 98 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped on Tuesday of last week. The episode features Jenny Beth's conversation with John Kahn, the singer-songwriter who penned the viral hit Fighter, which became an anthem of resilience and patriotism after the first assassination attempt on President Trump. The song was shared by President Trump on social media and went viral, surging to the top of the iTunes and Billboard digital sales charts. The episode features a great conversation about John's journey as a conservative artist, navigating the music industry in Los Angeles and Nashville. The two of them share memories of their common bond, their friendships with Andrew Breitbart. Highly recommended. And that's our Washington report for this week. Now to the call to action. The Senate Republican leadership election is Wednesday. It's a secret ballot election, though TPPA wishes it were not. TPPA would prefer that the vote be held publicly, like the election for Speaker of the House. But it's not. TPPA believes Florida's Rick Scott is the best choice to serve as Republican leader in the 119th Congress. The candidate chosen to serve as Republican leader will serve for the next 2 years as the Senate's majority leader. That's an enormously powerful position, so getting the right person in that job will be key to Republican success over the next 2 years. Rick Scott is committed to pushing the Trump agenda through the Senate. So, even though this is a private leadership election, and even though the vote is secret, we're going to join several other conservative grassroots organizations in urging our members and supporters, that is you, to call or email your Republican senator or senators and urge him or her or both of them to please vote for Rick Scott for Senate Republican leader in Wednesday's election. As always, if you have a question or a comment, you can email us at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question on air, just add for broadcast to the subject line. We'll see you next week. Until then, be well and be active.